the irony of all this is that a lot of Christians get upset about the Big Bang, but the Big Bang actually justifies Genesis 1, where God says at a moment in time, let there be light.
Some people will say, well, the Bible says this, but science says this. I think you have to call time out there because I don't think science necessarily says anything. Scientists do.
I want to know if we came from monkeys, if that's possible. Like, could that actually be?
The word science means to know. The word faith means to trust. And those things both answer significant pieces of the puzzle. Unless they're put together, you don't get the whole picture.
For the next 6 episodes, we're going to dive into what we're calling the evidence, and we're just tackling faith's toughest questions. And so these are things that we have wrestled through. I'm sure you are wondering, and we really want to dive in. We really want to give you responses and evidence to help you understand some of these topics. And so before we get into that, I feel like a really important piece of this is knowing why are you here? Who are you? Why are you here? Why is this important to you? And first off, my name's Andrew, and I'm one of the pastors at LCBC Church, and I'm with John and Adam. And so could you guys give us, maybe John, I'll start over here. Could you give us a little bit of why this topic's important to you?
Oh, sure.
Why are you here?
Yeah, my name's John, and I'm one of the pastors here. I work with young adults, and I also develop some content. I've always been weird. I've always wanted to ask the wrong question at the wrong time. A lot of people would, even in elementary school, I remember being 12 years old and really wondering, okay, so is evolution real? Does that mean God's not real? So I've always had these types of questions that float around my head. So went to Penn State and double majored in religious studies and philosophy, which Penn State is not a Christian school by any stretch. But it was great because I learned what was outside of my fence first. And I really appreciated that, postmodern feminism. We even studied all kinds of religions, philosophies, the whole gamut. And then went on, got my master's up in Boston at a place called Gordon Conwell. And that's where it's okay, now I can see where all that fits outside of what I believe. Now I know what I believe. Mm-hmm. And then I went on and got a doctorate at Fuller Seminary. Mm-hmm. And so now the doctorate was in youth and family studies, but it was in the theology department, and the guy was really rigorous and you got to know your theology. And so I loved that part of it. And so, yeah, I remember being in college and thinking to myself, why do people study philosophy? This is such a waste of time. You have some guy who comes out with this idea and everybody's like, oh, that's amazing. And then he's got a bunch of students that are all like, you're amazing. And then he dies and they're like, oh, he's wrong. This is what I think. And then, the next person's like, no, he's wrong. And this is what I think. And no, he's wrong. This is what I think. And I remember saying that to my professors and they were just like, hey, it's just what it is, But I think what it does, it helps us have language to kind of fill out what we believe, or what we think. And it's helpful because a lot of times I'll read a particular philosopher or an idea, and I'm sure you've had this, where it's you read a philosopher or an idea and you're like, that's stupid, or, oh, and that makes me think of something else. It's almost like leapfrog type of thought where it's oh, I'm going to jump into this. So that's a long answer, but that's why I'm here, because I really think that these questions, especially when we talk about the evidence, there are great answers to some of these questions. Yeah. And a lot of times what the answers are to give you more questions, and which is going to be really weird. And I'm sure that doesn't sound very satisfying to people, but it really is.
You've spent a lot of time diving into questions.
A lot of time answering this question.
Answering questions. and so even at our church, you answer questions like this for people at our church pretty often.
Sure. Yeah. No, I enjoy doing that for sure.
That's awesome. And Adam, how about you?
Yeah, my name is Adam. I am one of the pastors here at our church. I've been on staff with LCBC for 6 years.
Nice.
And before that, I went to school to be a teacher. Nice. And then did my post-grad work in Christian ministry and theology. And I felt just on a personal level, today we're talking about science, faith, how it lines up and what God has to say about it. And for me, that was a foundational part of why I ended up following Jesus. I dug into this stuff. You know how toddlers have a why phase where they're asking why questions all the time?
Living in that world right now.
I never grew out of it. That. Yeah. I'm still asking why. If I'm going to really give my life to something, then I want to know why.
Yeah.
And I have a spot in my heart for other people who are like that too. And so, yeah, I feel like John said he's weird. I feel like I'm weird when it comes to
Totally.
like, it's a hobby of mine to like listen to podcasts, watch videos, read books about apologetics, about theology.
Mhm.
I really want to know why to a lot of these things, get questions
And
answered.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that people feel like, okay, I'm weird too, and that's okay.
Yeah.
okay.
And understanding it's okay to ask these questions. And I think sometimes we can feel like, is it bad that I'm asking these questions? Do
know.
I have is there a perfect answer out
Oh
there?
my gosh, especially in our culture where it's like, no, you got to have the answers. I think that is baloney. Like you to have I'd rather have 3 good questions than 1 pat answer.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So depending on when you're jumping in on this is the first episode. And so we're going to go through 6 pretty big questions. And this one we're starting with is no small one. Has science disproved the creation story? And so we're going to get into a lot of stuff, and I really want to get to like, digging into some of the science, Big Bang Theory, evolution, the animals and weird things about their genomes, whatever we can, that you're wondering about, how does this fit? Does it fit into the creation story? Is it disproving it? And so John, I'm going to start getting right into it.
Yeah.
And really asking you that question is has science disproved the creation story?
No.
All right. How do you know that?
All right, next episode.
We're done. Next question. No, it hasn't, because science and faith were made to work together. And I know it's a very unpopular opinion today, but I believe that they were meant to work together. It's just trying to figure out what the balance is between them working together. It's like the how and the wow. It's the what and the who, or what and the why. I think that science is all about structure, and faith is all about meaning, and really assigning. So it's almost like if you were to have somebody do a chemical analysis on a bunch of paint on a canvas, like, oh, we know what the paint is, so now we've disproved the painter. I mean, it's ridiculous. In the same way, you see a dotted half note, or you see all these different notes on a page, like, oh, we know what the notes are, so we know there's no music. That's crazy. Like, those 2 things go together. Those 2 things are designed to, they're developed in concert with each other. Science and faith were meant to be together. And so I don't want to get us into it too soon or talk about it too fast, and maybe see what Adam thinks about this, but I think it has to do with a much broader story. There's a big history behind it, how science and faith basically got a divorce, and they're like our divorced parents that we're all just running for cover, like, who do we listen to? Like, who do we spend Christmas at? Like that sort of thing. So I don't want to take us too far into that.
I'm curious too, John, because I hear this come up a lot. In my own life, even, like, it feels like they can't work together, like they won't fit.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Like, what is it in our culture that's making us think that these 2 things can't
So you
work
want to
together?
get into it?
I would like to know. I feel like that's a good place to begin.
I'm a storyteller, so tell me if I go too long. You're going to cut me off, I'm sure. And be like, man, and I don't know how far back to go, honestly, because I think basically there are 3 points in time over the last 500-600 years where science and faith broke up, and they used to be married. And so I don't know how far back to go, honestly, because
get us started.
Okay.
And because I think what we're wondering is,
press the fast forward button.
You just said that faith and science, like, they can work together.
Yeah.
But I think, at least, I grew up feeling like they can't.
Yeah.
And so I want to understand why is that? Why was that even my experience, others' experience? Like, how did that come to be? And so I think some of what you're about to bring up is helpful to know, like, was there a point that wasn't the case where people saw them side by side? That is helpful to set up that tension.
Sure. So I'm going to share 3 stories, 3 snapshots in time. And again, listen, I'm going to oversimplify. Anybody listening to this who's like a historian or a major philosopher or whatever, they're going to be like, that is so wrong. He didn't do, like all the specifics. I'm going to oversimplify, and I'm going to analogize. And so I might step on some toes. So disclaimer. But I do feel like in the last 500-600 years, there have been 3 snapshots in time that have really brought to light what this divorce became. I think science and faith used to operate well together. So if you go way back to when I was a kid, about 1500-ish, the time of Copernicus. So there's this major thing in the philosophy world called the Copernican revolution. And I don't want to get anybody hung up on terms, but basically before Copernicus, people believed that faith and reason could kind of work together. In fact, they kind of complemented each other. So you got this guy Copernicus, and Copernicus lived in a world where everybody thought the earth was the center of the universe. And now this is so important, that was not the church. Can I say it enough? It was not the church, okay? It was Ptolemy. It was this guy named Ptolemy, about 2nd century AD. He came up with a Gaia-centric, an Earth-centric view of the universe, that the Earth's in the middle and everything revolves around it. And so the church over time was kind of like, sure, sounds good to us. Like maybe there's a couple scriptures that support that. So Copernicus was a canon. It's like in the Catholic Church, there's like a position where you're not quite a priest, but you're not quite a layperson. He was a canon. So, and he loved math and he loved looking at the stars. And as he looked at the stars, he's seeing the planets go through and everything. And he would chart something. This is crazy. Okay. Back then, Christians loved horoscopes.
Really?
Isn't that wild?
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so they would check their horoscopes because they looked at like Matthew, wasn't it where the Magi saw the star in the east, right? And so they're like, oh, it's biblical. Then tell me where the stars are, and I'll know.
Are they
whether
looking at to tell their future? Are they
totally
trying to know?
Well, like what's an advantageous day to do this or that, or is God trying to tell me something?
When to plant the seed?
Isn't that nuts? Yeah. So Copernicus, he was really good at observing like star positions and planet positions, and so he would just publish his stuff, and that's kind of how he made like a side hustle, which is kind of funny. So what he noticed was Mars goes through the sky, like all the planets go through the sky, and the belief at the time is they all go in perfect circles. And then Mars, if you ever look at it, like throughout the sky, it goes like this and it stops like May, June, July, August, it goes backward. And then it goes September, October. And every year it does this kind of like backward flow. And he's like, why does that? So long story short is he figured out that, wait a second, everything isn't revolving around us. We are revolving around the sun. So he comes up with this idea, and he doesn't want to get people too upset about it. But the Catholic Church at this time, actually, they were like, this is very interesting. They like, especially the Jesuits, they're like, dude, this is fascinating. Let's talk about it. They weren't like, shut it down, kill him. So he published his stuff. He died, and then I know it's horrible. He passed away. He passed away eventually. But then Galileo came by, and he kind of read some of Copernicus's work, and then he was developing the telescope, and he started looking at different planets, and he noticed, and he was kind of proving what was going on with Copernicus, and so he starts publishing some of his work. There was a guy at the time named Cardinal Bellarmine who was like, hey, we need to talk about this, because if what you're saying is true, then we're wrong, the church, because the church had hitched its wagon to Ptolemy and saying like, well, maybe the earth is the center of the universe. And the whole idea at this time, and I hope this isn't too long, but the whole idea at this time was that man is the center of the universe because man is special.
Right.
And God gave something special to humanity being the center of the universe, and everything theologically lined up with this idea of us being the center of the universe. But it didn't have to. They didn't have to listen to Ptolemy. They didn't have to respect what was going on. They could have just been like, hey, we're open to whatever.
And so at this point, so everything you've described up to this point, these are people not using the Bible necessarily, but just trying to study how the world works.
Yeah.
Where we are in the universe.
Yeah.
And
they were all Christian.
So these are all Christian people that are studying this.
They love Jesus.
At this point, they're not looking through the Bible to try to come up with this evidence. They're just outside of that trying to figure it out.
Right, totally.
And then are they trying to go back to see if it then fits in Scripture? And is that where
even conflict? Galileo was just like, man, this all orders together. This is great. And I'm not quoting him specifically, but I mean, like you can see where he's like, God's wonders are displayed in what I'm observing here. And it's just amazing, so like those two things fit together. So this is where it kind of gets funny, because Galileo, he publishes a work, and Bellarmine comes over to him and he's just like, hey, can you kind of hold off publishing for right now? Because we're trying to figure out what you're talking about and what's going to be our reaction if this is true. So for right now, can you just publish as a theory? And he goes, sure, whatever. And it really was like that. It wasn't like strong-handed or anything like that. They were friendly. And the Jesuits, again, were very, very interested in what Galileo had to say. Even the Pope Urban VIII, that was the guy at the time, he was kind of like, wow. Well, and you have a quote from him saying like, man, if you're right, then we're wrong. We're going to have to rethink this. It was totally fine. Okay. So then Galileo, this is so great. This is like behind the scenes. This is like, what's that show that does all the stars like extra, or, I
don't know that show.
No. Is it bad that I know this show? It's like right on before Wheel of Fortune, or it's at the same time.
I don't know
Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, Anyhow, so it's all the gossip about the stars. So I'm giving you gossip about these ancient philosophers and scientists. So anyhow, Moving on.
Did you just date yourself? Is that what just happened?
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. That actually no Wheel of Fortune's on. Ryan Seacrest does a great job with that, by the way. Anyhow, so moving on. What was I saying? I was talking about Galileo, right? So Galileo.
Yeah, the church now has to, so Galileo is rocking their world when it comes to science, planets.
And they're actually fascinated.
And they're interested, but they're sensing conflict with Scripture.
Right. They're thinking the common guy is going to be like, whoa, does this mean the church was wrong? They're like, can we just figure this out? Okay. So Galileo instead publishes a book where he features 3 people talking to each other. And obviously one of them's him. Obviously one of them is some dude. And then obviously the third person is this character called Simplicius, which means idiot or fool.
Man.
And it's the Pope. Wow. You know what I mean? It's obvious it's the Pope.
Oh, man.
So the Pope reads this is like, are you kidding me? You know, and Pope Urban VIII liked Galileo. They were friends. He reads this and he's like, dude, I've got the Reformation that just happened. I've got all these things that are going on. You know, I got storm the castle. You know, like he's got a lot of stuff. And he has to respond to this. And so that's when the Inquisition happens. And they're like, dude, you've got to recant. And they handled it wrong. The Pope was a jerk. Galileo was a jerk, but it was really a personality thing. So the reason why I'm saying this, I want to frame science and faith. Okay, so if we go back to the original question, so why is science and faith, why is there so much animosity between them? Science and faith used to be our parents. You know, they used to get along. We benefited from them. We came from them, you know. But at a certain point in time, Galileo and the Pope represent this feud. You know, it was this major breakup between the two. And so for the common person reading about this feud between these two people, they were like, so wait a second. So if we're not the center of the universe anymore, and you know, it's obvious now that we aren't, so does that mean we're not special? Does that mean that we don't have a special relationship with God anymore? Oh, does that mean that God's word is not true or authoritative? Are we just drifting in space somewhere? So we've now taken God or the Bible or authority of the Bible out of the center of everything. And now we're putting reason in there. And that was scary. Yeah. Does that make sense? So I'm like, I didn't know how far back to go, but I think that's the first fight moment. Yeah. You know, mom and dad broke up.
Is that because, so I'm wondering why that was such a crisis for them. Is that because they thought the Bible was affirming the us-centric universe?
Yeah, it did. Well, that's what they were saying. Okay. They were basically saying, well, everybody likes what the Greeks are saying with Ptolemy. So let's just say he's right.
Yeah. So instead of it just being, hey, we're learning something new in science,
right?
It became, this is actually threatening faith,
right?
But it wasn't supposed to be.
Do you see how it echoes evolution? Do you see how it echoes quantum theory? Do you see how it echoes some of these things? Whoa, we can't. We're going to make a camp over here. We're going to go to war with you. Yeah.
Because they had presuppositions about what was true in the world outside of the Bible. Like their worldview wasn't just the Bible. It included Ptolemy.
Isn't that trippy? I mean, that's crazy. Yeah. So that's where mom and dad broke up. And then for the next 100 years or so, you've got people going like, so how do we know it's true? Enter in, this is my second story. Okay, sorry, I like stories. So my second story is Descartes. René Descartes. You guys heard about this guy? You've probably heard about him in high school or something like that. He came up.
I know these names, and you may feel the same way. I'm like, it's somewhere in there, but I do not remember at all anything else about this person. Okay,
so you're about to have a great story with René Descartes. All of your friends will be like, you are so smart. Anyhow, René Descartes was a guy living at a time in the shadow of this event, and everybody's going like, so how do we know it's true? How do we know what's real? The big $50 word for this is epistemology. Like, how do we know what we know? And so then Descartes goes, well, you know what? I'm just going to figure out how I know what I know. I'm going to anchor it into something I can't doubt. And so he used doubt as a tool to come to truth. And this was weird. This was a very new thing because before you came to the truth through authority. You opened up the Bible, there's the truth. What he's intending to do is to say, I'm going to doubt my senses, I'm going to doubt my reason, I'm going to doubt what everybody else says, and I'm just going to like lock myself away. And he basically did this. He locked himself away. He said, I'm going to doubt everything until I can get to a point that I can't doubt anything. Now, this is interesting. Descartes was a theist, okay? He would say he was a Christian, but I mean, he at least believed in God. And he wanted to doubt everything so he could lay a cornerstone, like a foundation stone on which he can build everything else and eventually build a house that proved God. That was his intention. So again, science and faith are still working together here. So his cornerstone then was, I think therefore I am. Okay, so I can doubt everything else. The only thing I can not doubt is the fact that I'm thinking right now. I know that for a fact. So he would start with that, and then he built everything on top of that. So that idea then became a cornerstone for a lot of people. Two things. One, that I think, and I'm thinking right now, so I know that I exist. So that became a cornerstone. But also the other thing was we get to the truth through doubt. And that became what we call the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was like a period of a couple hundred years where science and progress and people built off of some of these former, philosophers and scientists. And what they did with that idea, now remember, he was wanting to prove God. What they did with this idea of like, I think therefore I am, but also doubt to come to certainty, was to say, well, then we need to doubt everything. Right. So, I mean, it sounds like you got some things.
Well, and what you're saying is that like, then all you can know is the things that you think, right? Like it limits your ability to understand things and you need to doubt everything.
Yep.
Right. And it sort of removes faith from the equation.
Yep.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And so it's, if mom or dad or faith or reason or whoever you want to picture as which, someone went to dad's house and hung out. You know what I mean? And just said, nope, we're skipping faith. We're all about reason now. We're all about man's ability to figure it out all by himself. Yep. So in the same way, they talk about the Copernican revolution as being the earth is no longer the center of the universe. Reason now is. We've taken the Bible out of being the center of authority and man's reason now is. And so what we've done is what they call scientism. Scientism is the belief that science has the answer for everything. And there is nothing outside of what we can see, sense, taste, touch, feel, all of it. And that's the only way we can come to truth. And so not only have mom and dad split up, but now they're firing custody battles back and forth.
Well, that's interesting to me because scientism sounds like a faith of its own, sort of like you have faith in the outcomes of these scientific experiments, what scientists have said.
Yep.
That's still faith. It's just faith separated from the Bible, faith separated from tradition.
Well, I mean, think about it. Like all of it is assuming something. Now, this gets me like energized because like when a person says to me like, hey, I don't believe in God. I only believe in what I can rationally, figure out in my head and be like, well, you know what? You're coming to the table with a set of assumptions. You're already coming to the table with a set of assumptions of, well, the universe acts in a certain way. There are laws. There's, physical properties. Like, why do you have that? You're starting with just as much faith as the person who's a Christian.
Yep.
So I feel like you're doing a great job setting up some background here for us to understand that the tension we feel between creation, what the Bible is telling us, and what we're seeing in science, maybe in textbooks, was genuinely just not always a problem. And that this is actually a new earth thing that we're sensing this problem between the two. And you mentioned mom and dad, right? So maybe dad's reason and mom's the Bible or creation.
So sexist, man.
So sexist. It's the first thing that came to my mind. And maybe it's just parent issues for me. Yeah. But I think about, okay, so here's what dad's saying. So like, what is mom saying? And so I and maybe you don't want to go here yet, but I'm wondering when we look at Genesis, when we look at the Bible, is it trying to tell us science? Is it trying to bridge that gap? Or is it doing something entirely different?
And I want to get there, and I do, and I promise it's not going to continue. I just got to get to my third story. But to answer your question, what was mom doing during this time? What do moms do? Moms protect. Moms lock down, be like, whoa, wait a second, back off, and so that's kind of what the church did. It kind of insulated itself because now we first started off where the breakup was the Copernican revolution, Galileo, and then the custody battle back and forth was the Enlightenment, where it's like reason is the center of everything. Now we get into divorce court, okay? And essentially what had happened as a result of the Enlightenment into like the early 1900s, you got evolution. You've got geology now that's saying that the earth is millions of years old, and Christians are going like, okay, y'all can say that, but we're not going to buy any of it. And so very protective mode, like mama bear, like this is who we are, and you guys are out there, and I'm just going to emphasize reaching people for the lost, which is kind of cool in one way, but it's like it isolated itself. And so it all came down to 1925. John Scopes is teaching evolution in Tennessee. They brought a lawsuit against him and went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was sort of a setup, of you've got the Christian right and the more scientific left, and they battled in this. And so you got Clarence Darrow, who's representing the evolution teacher, John Scopes. And then you had William Jennings Bryan. He was a former presidential candidate. He was a preacher. He's like, thus saith the Lord, and he really was like that in the courtroom. And so they were going back and forth. And probably the pinnacle moment of all this, of the divorce court between science and faith, was where, they're asking William Jennings Bryan, look at this rock. It's like 6 million years old. Don't you believe this? And he goes, I may not know the ages of rocks, but I know the rock of ages. Everyone in the courtroom's like,
Drop them like bars.
Totally. Yeah. Everybody's like, this is great. The problem is that they won the case. The Christians won the case. The teacher he was fined $100. They actually overturned that, in later appeals and stuff like that. But anyhow, the point was, in the newspapers, even though they won the case, they were portrayed as anti-scientific, anti-intellectual, backwoods, weird. And really, as a result of this, from 1925 to about 1930, Christians retreated. They went into Bible colleges. A lot of Bible colleges started up around 1930. They went into like summer revival meetings, radio ministry. Radio was a big thing that really, they thought the future is radio. So they went in, they retreated from culture at large. The more liberal kind of embracing of evolution or, whatever, science and the rest of it went into higher education and really became the model for a progressive, well thought out person. So that was the divorce court. That's what divorce came final. Science and faith just hated each other. So that's where we live. Yeah. Those 3 points along the way, that's where we're at. And it doesn't have to be that way. Yeah. For hundreds and hundreds of years before that, science and faith worked well together.
And I think that divorce court, mom and dad, that analogy is working really well for me. Mm-hmm. It's helping me picture, in a divorce, when kids are experiencing that back and forth with mom and dad, there is this sense of like, don't listen to anything he says, right? Mm-hmm. Don't listen to anything she says.
Yep.
And then there's that tension where was everything dad said actually wrong? Mm-hmm. Or is there we just don't like each other now?
Yeah.
So now we're avoiding each other. Is that like an accurate way to look at this? Everything you've kind of set up for us. Is that the right way to look at it?
100%. And you know what? You're going to ask questions. Adam's going to answer them. I'm going to answer them. And it's going to make people uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Because they line up on one of the two sides of this. They're going to be like, whoa, wait a second. You're asking this question. How dare you ask this question? Wow. And it's going to make people feel like this feels really, really uncomfortable, what we're about to get into.
So people are living in almost like a divided family and not even realizing it.
Oh, totally.
With their faith, with science. So this is good. This is so good. So that
now
leads
you see why it took so long to get there. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, so we got through an important backdrop to where we are now.
And it's not just that we live in a divided family, because no one would actually put their finger on it. They would see it as almost a cosmic or theological battle. That like, I represent truth and I have everything with me that's true. Look at my Bible. Yeah. And the way when you are questioning what I know in my Bible, then you are questioning a truth and you are in some ways demonic or satanic. When we know that there are Christians out there that believe in evolution, we know that there are Christians out there who can support the idea of the earth being millions and millions of years old and still love Jesus just as much, if not more, than many of the people that protect it.
So I'm now interested in that.
Yeah.
Because knowing that there's people out there that can actually marry the two of those, I want to know how they got there. And so if you're saying science isn't disproving the creation story, help me understand Genesis. Because I look at Genesis and I know there's a lot of ways to look at this, but if it's not trying, what is it trying to do? What is it trying to accomplish? And how should we look at and read Genesis in light of that?
Yeah, I can kick us off. One thing that we often talk about here at LCBC when it comes to the Bible is we have to build a bridge between our culture today and the culture that they lived in then. So it's kind of like here now, there then. How do you get there? Because the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. And that's important for us to remember, New Testament, Old Testament, all of it, because when we read it, we can't just read it with 21st century Pennsylvania eyes. Yep. We have to think, this was written a long time ago, and it was written to a very specific group of people at that time. And that's especially important, I think, in Genesis.
Yeah.
And we can dig into the interpretations of those passages and stuff like that. But I feel like that's where I need to begin.
Right.
Because what I believe when it comes to Genesis is it's not necessarily answering scientific questions.
No.
It's not about the material. And I think when you kind of like, we talked about William Jennings Bryan, he's thinking material.
Yeah.
Like it's telling us this is how old the rocks are.
Right.
I don't believe that's what Genesis 1 and 2 are trying to do.
Well, I mean, think about it. Science wasn't invented.
Right.
if this is going back to Moses, Genesis 1, so if we go back to and we accept a more conservative dating of 1500 for being the date of publishing Genesis, 1500 BC, 1500 AD is really the start of like Copernicus, Galileo, the scientific method, all that stuff. It's 3,000 years different. They were asking the question, they weren't asking this question, is there a God? They were asking the question, which God is it? That was the question they were asking. And so Genesis 1 and 2 are all about answering that question of saying there is one God. He is overall. He doesn't use any pre-existing material. I mean, if you go through some of the ancient Near Eastern ideas of what creation was all about, you got in Egypt, at the primordial waters, there was this water just expanded everywhere. And then all of a sudden this pyramid comes out of it called the Ben. And now this pyramid comes Ra. Ra comes out of a lotus flower. And he sneezes and Shu and Tefnut come out. And they're the gods who have sex with each other and have the rest of the gods. I mean, that was their idea of how creation happened.
Sounds like a weird story.
Well, now
I got a little uncomfortable halfway through the story. I'm not going to lie.
That's true.
It's strange.
That's a pretty productive sneeze. But we got to be careful that we don't like say, well, that's weird. But when ours is weird,
right?
But I would say ours is transcendent. It doesn't involve pre-existing material. It doesn't involve other gods being jealous or having sex with each other or anything like that. In the beginning, right? Or in the beginnings, the word there, Bereshith, means like in the beginning time. You know, it's like an area of time. God hovered over the surface of the water. And then it says, let there be light. He just commands things to happen. And it's like, the answer is there's one God. He's preeminent over everything. And he didn't build with anything else. I mean, he came from nowhere. That's fascinating.
Well, I'm wondering too. So, like, what you're saying is there were other creation stories in the ancient Near East at this time.
Oh yeah.
What I've heard is because there were other origin stories, that like discounts what the Bible has to say.
Oh,
do you think that's true?
Okay, so Bill Maher talks a lot about, well, you know, in previous they borrowed from all. You tell me if this sounds familiar. Okay, the Sumerian epic of Marduk. Okay, so Marduk is this guy. He's kind of like y'all watch Star Trek, right? You know,
I've seen it.
Not Star Trek, the old.
I'm
series.
more of a Star Wars kind of guy, but I've seen some Star Trek.
I'm trying to think. Well, do you still watch Star Wars now? They've ruined Star Wars.
They've gone downhill a little bit.
They have gone downhill a lot. Yeah.
The Mandalorian, excellent show.
Chris Pine does the new.
Oh yes.
Yeah, he does the new Star Trek. He's awesome. And then think Chris Pine when you're thinking Marduk. Okay, so you got these old gods that are all sitting around in the Sumerian, you know, pantheon of gods, and there's some older gods that are just cranky and they hate the younger gods. And one of the younger gods, there's this fight that breaks out between them, and they kill this dude, and his wife gets super mad. Her name is Tiamat. And she is the chaos dragon. She just goes like, she's like going throughout the universe, destroying stuff because someone killed her husband. The old gods are like, oh, I can't stand these younger gods. They're so annoying. Will someone deal with them? And the problem is Tiamat is going around the universe, destroying everything. She's invoking chaos everywhere she goes. She's threatening the cosmic order. Okay, like the quantum level of the universe is at stake. So Chris Pine, Marduk, goes to these old gods and goes, I'll take care of her. And they're like, get out of here. He's like, no, I'll take care of her. I'll destroy her. One condition, you make me king of the gods. And again, they kick him out. They're like, get out of here. One wise old dude speaks up and he goes, wait, guys, listen. If we say go ahead, there's no way he's going to beat her, but he'll weaken her and we can finish the job. So they bring back, yeah, go ahead. So he takes out his sword, goes after Tiamat. He's like, Tiamat, come over here. And she's like, slices her in half. Takes the top half, throws it up, and it becomes the sky. Takes the bottom half, throws it down, and becomes the land. And her blood is red, so he creates humans. That's the creation story of Samaria. So, does that sound like Genesis 1 and 2?
It sounded very weird. But what you were saying is, this is an old, ancient story.
Yeah. That's some people say we borrowed from.
Okay, and back then, this is how they tried to understand God.
Yeah.
And creation?
Yeah. It's called etiology. It's like, how do you explain things? So we're going to make up a story to explain these things. And none of these people thought like, this is literally what happened. They're just like, this is the way we kind of try to make sense
of
it.
So they're not even trying to say literal.
They're not talking history.
People know that this is a made up story to kind of like share how creation started.
Not only that, I'll double it. Okay. And you can speak to this too. I think that most people reading Genesis 1 and 2 would have been like, this isn't satisfying. Like, so one God just goes like, let there be light. That's ridiculous. They would have thought it was confusing and weird. Like, where's the drama? Where's the intrigue? How do you explain rain? You know, like,
right. I think that's the uniqueness of the Israelite story is the one God thing, right? That's very unique and specific to them.
Yeah.
One thing I am wondering, John, when people talk about these other origin stories, ancient Near East, it seems that the Israelite authors, Moses or others, they were aware of those other stories, and Genesis 1 and 2 was kind of written in response. If that's true, does that make it less like true, less believable, less credible, the Genesis 1 and 2 story, if it was written in light of other stories?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to like, what was the purpose of Genesis 1 and 2? And that's what you were trying to answer here is, was it to establish the scientific method and to say on a quantum level, this is how God did it? How and what? No, it's trying to say who.
And so I think what maybe feels frustrating about that at times is that all makes sense, that there's a different way people viewed, creation stories and gods. But why is Genesis mapped out in such a way that seems so linear? Like day 1, day 2, day 3, it feels like it's pulling you into that belief of like, here's exactly how it happened. Here's how you need to look at it. So why is Genesis set up like that if it was only really wanting us to see it more like poetic?
I think it doesn't matter how it's laid out, regardless of how it's laid out, whatever system we would find ourselves in, like right now we find ourselves in the scientific system and in a context that really we think through scientifically, we would look at it and try to make it fit what we think. If we grew up in a story culture, we'd be like, so why is it set up like a story? Well, it's just our context that we're in. So we're always going to read with our lenses, whatever's going to be there. If the Bible were written today, I think it would have been a much different thing, trying to reach people with a more scientific viewpoint, maybe just saying like, look, you might not believe in God, but let's prove to you why there's a God that's necessary or something like that. Yeah.
Dr. John Walton is someone I've read a couple of his books. He's a super interesting guy, but he talks about how during that time, there's this 7-day inauguration period for kings to enter a throne. And the way he interprets it is when the Genesis story is writing out those 7 days of creation, it's God ascending his throne. And when a king rests, a king always rests on the throne. So on the 7th day, when God rests, he's resting on his throne. And so it's about this idea that what we just talked about, there's one God, he created order out of disorder, and now he's on the throne. And when I first heard that, it blew my mind because I was like, wait a minute, they're not trying to make a scientific material explanation for us. They're telling us how God became king. And I was like, wow.
And see, this is the thing. Okay, so it's going to appear like I'm completely walking back my previous point here because I love this stuff. And I think it's fascinating to think through the implications of this, especially now, there's the more conventional understanding, kind of Newtonian physics. And now in the last 50 to 100 years, there's been much more quantum physics of thinking of like what's happening on the subatomic level, like what's really happening here. And it's fascinating as some of that research has become known, the more contemporary astrophysics, like right now, the way that most experts, and I'm not a scientific expert, okay, major disclaimer. I'm not trying to set myself up as any kind of authority on this whatsoever. So I'm glad I put that out there.
You're not parallel with Bill Nye?
No. But
was he quantum physics?
No. But I am somebody who just loves this stuff. So I can tell you what I know. And so I do think, even though the Genesis 1 and 2 are not a science textbook, and we're not supposed to be reading science in that, I do think that God's winking at us. And this is where it gets really fascinating because I don't think it's the intention of it, but I think there's like a side, like, I got you. There is some science that's really interesting in Genesis 1 and 2. So it starts off and it says in the beginning, meaning like there was a point in time. I don't know if you know this, but like 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, people were thinking that the earth or the universe always existed. There was this idea of a steady state universe, that it was forever and there was no creation. And that's why people laughed at Christianity because they're like, oh, there was a point in time. Well, you got Hubble, who was able to detect that galaxies are moving away from us. Penzias and Wilson came up with this idea of like background radiation. And isn't that interesting? In 1950, we realized actually there was a Big Bang. There was a point in time. And the funny thing, the irony of all this is that a lot of Christians get upset about the Big Bang, but the Big Bang actually justifies Genesis 1, where God says at a moment in time, let there be light. And if you really think about it, okay, this is where it gets trippy. And tell me if I'm going too long on this, but
I do want to direct us to like
the science.
I'm wondering if you're getting here.
I'm getting to the science.
Okay.
I'm getting to the science.
Get me to the science.
I'm getting to the science. And you're like, John, shut up. Stop talking. Don't say your stories. But there's a really good story here. So Genesis 1, it talks about how the earth was formless and void, tohu vabohu. And that means like there was no matter and there was no place for matter to hang. So it's like, imagine there were no flowers and there were no vases for the flowers to be in. It was just like immaterial. There was nothing. And so in that chaos, it talks about how God hovered over the surface of the waters. The most current understanding that we have in terms of astronomy and astrophysics is that at some point, everything exploded. And when it exploded, everything was dark. And all material, all matter it was so early in its development that it was shapeless, formless, and it was wildly chaotic. And as it stretched out, not even photons could escape. So everything was dark. And at a certain part where gravity and the rest of it all became at a certain level where it was able to heat and pressure came to a specific level, the entire universe was bathed in light. Mm-hmm. Everywhere, complete like blinding lightness. And then it all settled out upon itself. And that's where, you have this idea of where everything, the molecules and the rest of them, they're all settling out. I mean, it is fascinating when we think where in Genesis, it talks God hovering over the surface of the waters. The scientists call that the quark-gluon plasma. And they talk about how on a quantum level, everything was aqueous. Everything was plasma-like. Wow. And dark. And then at some point, everything ignited into light. And then everything after that settled out into matter. That to me is a wink that God's sending us from Genesis 1.
And so you're saying that there's actually scientific discoveries that at certain points, people are like, the Bible's ridiculous. An intelligent designer, that's ridiculous. Right. But then there's actually legit scientific discoveries that we're seeing and showing, wait a minute, like this actually could line up with what the Bible says.
Could they work together? Could they be back together again?
Right.
Could mom and dad actually agree on something?
Because we keep getting to these extremes where we're like, how could the Bible ever possibly line up with science? But then we learn stuff that says, wait a minute, this actually could be.
Now, I am oversimplifying a few things because when you look at, and you can probably speak to some of this, but like when you look at the order of creation, there are some things that don't line up scientifically. I think it's like you have
sun
trees.
After the light.
Yeah. Like some things there. But at the same time, the science doesn't line up with reason, so we had these elements that bumped into each other and exploded. You got a couple problems here. There's nothing, okay? It's not like a black room. It's not like an empty closet. It's nothing. It's no up, no down, no physics, no nothing. And somehow we got two little elements. And then not only that, but you got two things. Who wrote the software to make these things explode? Like, why are there rules like that? So science has got some real issues on its own. But when you put science and faith together, now you start getting some, this makes sense.
And so to bring this back to kind of, there's different views on Genesis and the creation story. And based off what I heard you guys saying are you telling me that literal days can't be true? Or is it one of the options that could actually be plausible? Like could 6-7 literal days be true? Or is that unlikely? Like, what are the ways as Christians that we can look at Genesis and come to terms with this? Like, is that?
I would love to offer an analogy that's helped me a lot as I've come to try to understand this, because I think it's probably more the second thing that you're saying. I think there's an opening for a broad spectrum of beliefs when it comes to the origin story of the universe in Genesis 1 and 2. Here's the analogy. There's a difference between a house and a home. Both of them are creative processes. Both of them involve creation. If I asked, like, hey, tell me the story of how this became your home, and John began to say, well, in 1972, the foundation was laid and they put the scaffolding up and the beams were put in place. That's a true story of how this house was built.
That's good.
But he could also say, well, in 2010, me and my family moved in and we started to arrange the furniture, and I put this picture up on the wall and we picked this room for my son and this room for me and my wife. Both of those are creation origin stories. One is a home, one is a house. And so when we look at Genesis 1 and 2, it's not really the house story. It's not like the putting down the foundation with the cement and the scaffolding going up. It's more about the home. It's about what God did to order the universe for humans.
I love that.
It's the story of how the the house became a home. And I think if that's true, then there's space for, God, we believe in an all-powerful God that's sovereign over the universe and could have created everything in 6 days with age. He could have created trees that were fully mature and rocks that were fully mature in a fossil layer. He could have done that. He also could have used a longer process to do it as well. The Bible is a home story, not a house story. That to me was so helpful.
That's super helpful. And I want to answer your question specifically, but I want to tag off of that because I think this, again, comes down to where science and faith can work together. Science is structure, faith is meaning. And so we see this in all kinds of ways where these two people are still together. They're still married for like hundreds and thousands of years. You have something like law and justice. So we come up with laws, but the reason we come up with laws is because we want justice. And so justice is the faith side of it. Law is the structure side of it. They work together. That's why we have law and justice. Or you have math and music. Anybody would tell you that when you look at music, you've got intervals, you've got chords, you've got fifths and sevenths, and that's all math, right? But no one would tell you the reason why I'm listening to this song is because of, this particular note of that particular frequency. No, it's because it's music. And so math and music work together in beautiful ways. Why can't science and faith work together? You can do it in a way that doesn't rob from either one of them.
Right.
And so when you're asking, basically what you're asking is like, okay, so cool. Let's get away from the overarching like faith side of it. So is there any science in Genesis 1, 2, and onward?
Yeah. And so I think the tension I feel, and I'm sure others feel with this is, okay, so we can come to terms that, hey, maybe Genesis, we're not even reading it the right way. The way people originally looked at it when it was written, the genre of it was different than how we look at it right now. And so I think pulling out from that, does that put anything else in the Bible at risk? Like, does that make it way more complicated? Like now when I look at other parts of the Bible, am I now having to look at it like?
And you're asking Ken Ham's question, which I think is actually a very good question.
Who's Ken Ham?
Ken Ham is the guy who did Answers in Genesis. Some people know, basically he started this ministry that says, we're going to defend the Bible from the very first verse. And so that if someone's going to say, well, we can't take this literally, then what things can we take literally and what things can we not take literally? And I think that
feels like a good question, right?
It's a great question. Now, I laugh about it sometimes because sometimes the answers that come out from Ken and Answers in Genesis can be a little bit simplistic. But in this, though, he's got a really good point. So how do we know? How are we the arbiters of what's literal versus what is figurative? And so it's tough because I've heard people say, and this is where I'm going to go back and forth. There's some people who say, well, it's poetry, right? It's written in poetic meter. And so people reading it back then would have understood, okay, well, this is something that's meant to give me a broad idea of God's sovereignty. It's not meant to give me a step-by-step, this is exactly what happened. But to your question, then why did God give us specific things of like he did this on day 1 and this on day 2? And probably the best question is it a literal day?
Well, one thing that helps me to think about it is like the Bible is a book, but is really a library. Like it's a collection of books and there's different kinds of books in there. And even within books themselves, there's different sections that might be different styles, So like when you read the Psalms, those are songs, those are poems, and they're meant to be taken literally, but they're also not literal. Do you know what I mean? And so if you go to the library and you said, well, is this library true? That would be a ridiculous question. That's not, you could ask that about a specific story that was included in a book in the library. But that's kind of when people ask like, about the Bible, about this story, like I think you got to dig into the specific literary genre that you're looking at within a book in the Bible. That's helped me because you're asking if this isn't literal, when they say days, then what about Jesus? Well, those are two completely separate things. They're in the same library, but those are two separate stories, two separate books within that library.
And are there cues for us to know? Like, so that's helpful. So when you pick up the Bible, I mean, it's easy to like, you have one sitting in front of you that's like, well, it looks like one book to me.
Right.
And then you realize that this is actually a collection of books, of letters, all put together in one binding. And what you're saying is that it's actually they're all different books. What are the cues for us to know which genre we're stepping into?
That's really good.
Do we have to do that homework before we read the Bible, or how does that work?
John, help me with this, but I think the answer is yes. You got to do your homework. One thing that's helped me a lot, just personally, having a study Bible. There are people who are literally paid. They spend their entire lives focusing on that question. Like, how do you know that are you reading it correctly? and their notes are in the margins. They're down at the bottom. You should have a study Bible if you want to follow Jesus. But yes, I think there's homework involved. What else would you say?
I think, I'm sitting here in my head and I'm like, man, this is a great question. I mean, this really is the center point of the issue of, is this literal or is this not literal? I read it literally being like, okay, well, day 1, he did this, day 2, he did this, day 3, he did this. And then when I'm confronted with the science of like, what were you saying? It was, what's the order issue again? Where you have the sun before
the
light.
Sun before light. There's light, and then the sun comes later. There's also plants before the sun.
Yeah. So give me a couple more. Help me stall for time.
Oh, I don't know anymore. Those are the ones I hear.
But, there are obvious scientific issues on it. I think that's where, when I go back to it, that's where I read the Bible hopefully, the way Jesus would have read it. And when he confronts Pharisees, and when the Pharisees say, yeah, what about this? And they come at him with a literal thing.
Right.
He always, what they say, like deontologizes, or he takes it back and he goes, whoa, let's get the big picture here. And so I think we're reading the Bible wrong if we say, oh no, you destroyed my literal reading of Genesis 1, verse 8 or whatever. Therefore, I'm not going to read the Bible anymore. There's something wrong there, or that I'm going to hate anybody who has a different reading of Genesis 1, verse 8. Who is it that talked about there are different levels of theological issues? There's like a bullseye and then out and out.
Right.
What are they? I'm really prepared for this. But basically, you've got like core doctrine, right? And then you've got, was it not opinion, but like well-researched opinions. And
you
then
have your core, which is like, this has to be true for this to even be the same faith.
Yep.
And then you have like your doctrine where different denominations might say, hey, we draw a line here, but another denomination draws one here. Right. And then you have preferences.
Nice.
Where it's like, this doesn't really hurt anything if you believe this or this.
Yeah. So what would you say then Genesis 1, 2 falls into on that bullseye scheme?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah.
I think that.
I don't think it's core.
And I think that is probably, people might put it in a different spot on their circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the tension is. People feel maybe they've had it in the middle,
mm-hmm.
but maybe it should have been pushed out to one of the other circles. And that might be what someone's wrestling with right now, is like, this is core to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like if this isn't literal, it's how I was raised. Or if science can't be true, then the Bible can't be true. And what I'm sensing both of you kind of pushing on is, hey, maybe we're misunderstanding how to read this, and we're putting something into core we shouldn't be, and that maybe I can be a faithful, Jesus-loving Christian and have differing views on the age of the earth and what Genesis is actually trying to teach us. Is that accurate to what you guys are saying?
Yeah, and I think, again, what constitutes your core, it scares me if you think that, well, if I don't have my rendition of Genesis 1, verse 8, I don't even know what 1-8 says, but someone's got to look it up. But what does it say? It's
let me read it for you. Genesis 1:8. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening, and there was morning the second day.
Yeah. Okay, good. So Genesis, if that is not a literal day, the Hebrew word yom, if that is not a literal day, then I'm just going to give up on the whole Bible. I think that there's a flaw. That's a flawed way to look at the Bible. But I also think like if it's if that says that, well, that didn't really happen, that's another flawed way to look at the Bible. Or that I'm going to go to war with you over the Bible. Again, I think that's where Jesus kind of came at it, was like, look, we're gonna take a step back and kind of appreciate the larger view here. And honestly, I think I read it, again, like I said, literally, when I hear yom, when I see day, is that an actual day? Is it possible that the science can inform me on this? Hey, was it possible that it was millions of years between this happening and that happening? It's possible because no one died yet. Okay, so this is where it's going to get a little weird, but when death enters the picture as a result of sin, that's when time exists. Because before death, there's no time. Right? Because
how do we know that?
Well, I mean, think about it. Just from a rational point of view, if you are born and you live forever, and everybody lived forever back then, right? You know, it's like you have an eternity that you're going to live with God in heaven forever in the Garden of Eden, right? So then every point along a ray is an infinite set of points. Like every dot means nothing. You know, we'll make more, you know. But when you make a line segment, when you have a beginning and an end, that's when every dot has meaning. So if I only have 30 years left, every year has a meaning to it. If I have an infinite set of years left, then years don't really mean anything. Minutes don't mean anything. Hours don't mean anything. Now you can measure the progress or the duration of something, but it really doesn't mean anything because there's an infinite set of hours, minutes, days. And so that's why I say, like, before sin entered the picture and before death entered the picture, I don't really know if we know what we can qualify as time, whether it could be millions of years, it could not be millions of years. And again, that might be something you have a total problem with. I can see Adam maybe thinking like, well, what about this, this, and this, which I'm fine with. But that's where we wrestle with something on the outer ring. And we say like, look, I'm going to take this literally, and I think it can fit in scientifically, but I could be wrong. Now, I'm not going to do that with the resurrection. I'm not going to do that with Jesus going to the cross for our sins. Like that is something that's core. So that's where I play.
Some of the stuff, which is just a little plug, we're going to get to some of those questions about Jesus, and which is going to be really cool. And so let's make this personal. Okay. So we're getting a lot of great information around how to see Genesis, maybe opening some room for, we could see this a little differently than, maybe see it differently than we thought. How should someone who's trying to follow Jesus be faithful to the Bible, and you get into interactions with other people that maybe really lean into science, and to them, the Bible can't be true because of what they believe about science.
Yeah.
I know this is a big question, but how does someone begin to bridge that kind of a gap? Like, where would you, on a very simple level, real quick, here's a few things that you should dive into to help with that relationship. How can someone bridge that gap?
Insult them, call their character into question, straw man arguments.
Take notes.
One thing I think that helps is similar to the house-home analogy, but it's another analogy. Well, if someone asks the question, why is this water boiling? There could be multiple answers to that question. And I think one answer could be, well, the molecules are moving really fast and the water's 212 degrees. Another answer could be, I'm making an omelet. So the water's got to be boiling for that. And I think the Bible is maybe more that second one. God's making an omelet. Like, this is the story of how he created something for humanity that would eventually lead to Jesus. And this is an omelet story. It's not a like scientific water boiling at 212 degrees story. So if someone is pressing me about like, I believe in science, I can't believe in this story, what I would encourage them with is like, this is not a scientific handbook. This is an omelet story. And it's a story of God ascending his throne in 7 days and creating order from disorder. And there's a lot of space to believe different things within that. And then I would take them back to Jesus, because that's a different story. That's an eyewitness account story. This is not an eyewitness account story. No one that I know was there when this happened. Even the authors of that story weren't there when it happened. So it's very different than the Jesus story.
That's cool.
That's good.
I like so I got a ball story to your omelet story, and then you can decide which you like better.
All right. I'll be the judge.
It's basically the same thing, but so imagine one of those like single layer kind of ranch homes. It's got the family room right in the front. It's got that big picture window. And so you come home from work. It's 5 o'clock, whatever. You come in and you see glass all over the floor, and you see a ball. What would you assume?
Someone threw that ball through the glass.
Someone threw the ball through the window.
Probably the kids.
Yeah. So let's say you have a friend who's like a CSI expert, and he comes in, he sweeps it, he does all this stuff. He sees like, okay, the gnat died at 3 o'clock because it hit the ball, whatever he's figuring out there. But he's got the trajectory, the speed, the velocity, the mass, all that stuff. And he gives you this report at 3:55 p.m. A ball came in at 23 miles per hour from the northeast at a trajectory of, and he gives you all that stuff. Did you get your answer?
You're getting more pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah. You got a lot of pieces of the puzzle. About 2 hours later, a guy knocks at the door, and he shows up with his dog, and he goes, hey, I'm really sorry. We were playing fetch, and like some kid grabbed the ball and threw it. My dog got hurt trying to catch the ball. I had to take it to the vet. Couldn't come till now. I'll pay you for your window. So this is where I feel like when we talk about science and faith, the word science means to know. The word faith means to trust, right? And so science is all about what, how, details. And faith is all about who, why, what's behind it. And those things both answer significant pieces of the puzzle. But unless they're put together, you don't get the whole picture.
Yeah, that's really good.
And so it's funny, like you think in most languages, you said you took Spanish, right? What language did you take in high school?
I took Spanish.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So,
But
conocer.
do I remember Spanish is the second question you should ask.
Conocer means...
Right. The difference between
Conocer means I know him.
and saber. Yeah.
Saber means I know it.
Right.
And German, weiß, ich weiß. And then ich kenne. Like I know that person, ich weiß, I know it. Je sais, as I know it. Je connais, I know that person. So a lot of these languages have a difference between knowing it versus him or her or them. And I think that is inherent in our understanding of epistemology, or our understanding of what truth is that the Bible is the guy showing up at the door. The Bible says, hey, dude, do all your research. Awesome, do it, But I'm actually going to show up at the door and show you why that ball's in the middle of your family room. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. I would say I like Adam's analogy more.
Let's go, John.
Come on. Round 2.
I didn't come up with this, John Lennox, but I'll take it.
He's great.
I love him.
Well, so the analogies help because it's also pulling together this idea. I've heard this term, no final conflict, where if we...
Sounds like an arcade game.
It's probably what it was from.
I've seen that movie.
Finish him.
I played more arcade games than I did paying attention in science class, which is why I have so many questions. But,
nice.
So what we believe about faith, sounds like as we learn more about science, that actually doesn't have to mean this is now wrong. It could just mean, oh, here's more information.
Right.
So maybe this actually helps me either interpret Genesis the right way, or they weren't really trying to butt heads in the first place. So here's what I'm wondering. Is there some stuff that, okay, we got new information. Oh, that can fit. That could make sense. Then I feel like we get some information that's like, okay,
that's hard.
I don't know that can fit. Because if this is true, maybe this actually messes things up.
Right.
And we get some real compelling evidence from scientists about other things. So I'm even wondering, let's talk like evolution.
Did we come from monkeys?
Did we come from monkeys? I want to know if we came from monkeys, if that's possible. Like, could that actually be what the Bible is saying?
Well, first of all, okay, so this is why I shared those stories. Okay, this is why we took 45 minutes talking about all that. But anytime you feel pressure, you've got to kind of pull back and remind yourself that we live in a context. And that was the same pressure that normal average folks in the 1500s, 1600s felt like, oh no, you mean we orbit the sun? Does that mean that we're not special? Does that mean Genesis is wrong? And maybe I should just give it all up, which we know now, 500 years later, we're like, no, that's ridiculous. Like, why would you give up your faith because we orbit the sun? And I think that's the kind of thing 500 years from now, somebody would be like, why would you give up your faith because you discovered this principle called evolution, which is now morphed into something different, or, whatever. So I feel like we've got to remember we live in a context. We live in a time that is always slanted in certain directions that make us feel like, so again, I would say, check your soul. Do you feel pressure? Anytime you feel pressure, it's like, who's putting that pressure on me? Am I putting that pressure on me? It's okay, well, does the knowledge of what we know right now putting the pressure on me? And to always realize that we're always learning new things. And so it won't always be like this. So that's my setup.
So are you saying no monkeys?
I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think to answer that question, you got to figure out, like, what does the Bible say? It says that God created mankind and he created them special. It uses the phrase like in the image of God.
Yeah.
And that means the humans like us, they're listed in that story, Adam and Eve, they're special and different from everything else he made.
Right.
And so if there's evolution involved, when humans came into the picture, something very special happened. So you could take that a couple different ways. It could be evolution, could not be, but there is something specific about human beings. And I think that's where I'd love to hear your perspective.
I'll say it outright. Like, no, we didn't come from monkeys. You're crazy. Like, we didn't come from monkeys. But I do want to say you're crazy. We didn't come from monkeys with a nuance. And it's not backtracking on it at all. When I think of evolution and the essence of evolution, I go to Richard Dawkins, because I don't want to go from some Christian, like, well, this is evolution, this is why it's wrong. I want to go straight to the source. And so Richard Dawkins, I would assume, would probably be, he's in love with evolution. Every time he talks about it, he is a angry, bitter man. And he's like that guy who comes out and like, get off my lawn. He's that kind of person. But when you talk about evolution, he just lights up. Do you ever see that?
Yeah,
Oh, he's like all about it.
he does.
All I know is if I'm ever on his bad side, I can be like, but evolution. And he'll be like, oh, evolution. It's so beautiful. Nice thin mutton on a sandwich, evolution sandwich. I love it. You know, like that is, he's
deep
all
commitment to that
about
interpretation right
it.
there.
He's all about it, you know? And this is how he describes it. It's, he actually, in one of his video series, he walks out to this, I don't know, it's like a cliff that goes up like 1,000 feet. Okay. And he's standing there. I might get some of the details on this wrong, but I just remember this from this video. I watched it a couple of times. I've read all of his books, not all of them, some of them. So he's standing by this cliff and he goes, I want to describe for you evolution. And so he said, I want to give you a backdrop as to why creation is a myth. According to Genesis, and he's standing there and they do the wide angle and you see like the top of this cliff. According to Genesis, in one day, God created humans. And so that would be like me jumping to the top of this cliff. He's like, that's preposterous. But evolution gives us something beautiful. And he walks around to the back of it. And there's this switchback trail that goes up like this. And he starts walking up it. And as he's walking up it, he talks about how evolution over the years, slowly through all these changes, all of these, help me with the language on it. The
Mutations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I just couldn't think of the word. So through these different mutations, somehow through natural selection, you're able to be more and more progressed in terms of your complexity, and eventually you get there. And I'm serious, like he is totally in love. He's like, it's just beautiful, and he's like gushing. You know, if I was his wife, I'd be jealous. So as he's talking about this, I don't know if, are you catching it? Like how it's ridiculous to think that anything rolls uphill.
Yep. It's sort of like the concept of like irreducible complexity.
Yeah.
That like an eyeball, if it developed over a long stretch of time, for a long time, it would be a totally useless sack of like fluid until one time it finally could see something. And that just doesn't make sense. That's what you're talking about, like rolling uphill.
Now, people, okay, so let me back up here. So the thing that's rolling all by itself up a hill, we never see things roll uphill.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen something roll uphill?
I've not.
It's a horrible analogy. In the same way that creation would be technically a horrible analogy to say someone can jump up 1,000 feet, right? So both of them have to be affected from the outside.
Yep.
So either, you know, you're giving them like a bungee thing, or, you know, you're pushing them uphill. And so he says the forces of evolution push it uphill. But no, nothing forces anything uphill. Nothing goes contrary to the laws of nature in order to achieve something that's beyond itself. So that's where what you're talking about in terms of irreducible complexity. Michael Behe wrote this book back in the 90s where he said that everything that we see in us that's complex, our eyeballs, tongue, nose, whatever, there are certain parts that come together that work that give it an advantage to those things not being together and working. And so he uses a mousetrap as an example. Like a mousetrap has like 7 parts. And so now imagine you had a table full of those 7 parts. It, as a mousetrap, is not catching mice, right? When does it catch mice?
Once it's all together and functioning, yeah.
Yeah. So if I were to put, here's the bottom part, you know, like wood part, and I put a spring on top, and that's it. Is it going to catch the mice? No. It's got to have next to like the little loop, and it's got all those things have got to be, but they have to work together. You have to put them, assemble them in such a way that only when the last piece is in place, then it has an advantage over everything else. So what Adam's talking about here is this idea of irreducible complexity, is that our eyes didn't just happen in one generation. You know, if we evolved from fish or bears or whatever, eventually we evolved into these things that have eyes and stereoscopic vision and cerebral cortex and all that kind of stuff, retinas, rods, cones, foveas. All those things are not helpful in themselves. They have to be fully assembled in order to do it. And so that's why I have a problem with evolution. However, and this is why I wanted to have a caveat to this, is that in recent science, it's saying that maybe there are transitional forms along the way that having like a water sack or whatever would have helped you to find food or whatever, and would have helped you along the way. But we still have a problem with this. Nothing rolls uphill. Nothing rolls uphill. And so I don't have a problem with someone who's a Christian who says, I love Jesus. I believe in the literal 6 days of creation. I think we're only 6,000 years old. That's fine. I don't accept evolution. I also am fine with a person that's like, no, I believe that it's millions of years old, it's billions of years old, and that, God used evolution to bring us to this state. There's a lot of questions I have about that scientifically, but I'm fine with that because those are tertiary issues. Those aren't like main core issues. If you go to Hawaii, you see Hawaii has a bunch of islands, right? And we know over time that lava went out and, made an island, and then like the crust moved. And it moved. And so you can actually see where this stuff is coming out. And you can see over millions of years' time, it's probably likely that that thing moved over millions of years. If you go down to the Antarctic and you core down an ice, and you know that every little layer of ice represents a season, and you add up all those seasons, you come up with millions of years. That's the science trying to inform us of what faith is telling us as well. I think those two things can work together.
And so it sound like creation, how the earth formed, was created. There could be room for that whole 6,000 years, millions of years.
I'm a little sketchy on the 6,000 years,
right.
but
that one feels less.
I always say this though. I mean, tell me that I wasn't there. So I mean, like, I don't know.
When people ask like, how old is the universe? I've heard this guy, Frank Turek, that I listen to sometimes. He'll say, well, I know it's at least like 53 years old because that's how old he is. And he's like, really everything is, you're just going based off your best evidence.
Yeah.
So based off of what you just said, are you saying that you don't really side with young Earth?
I mean, if you press me, I would say it's probably not 6,000 years old. Yeah. Mostly because we still have writing from people like 10,000 years ago. You have artifacts from human settlements like 20,000 years ago. So I mean, it's like, So you've got to, I think, you've got to give science a fair hearing because, listen, if you believe that Christ is preeminent, if you believe that God is the God of the universe, then science can't ever touch that. Nothing can touch that. And so listen to the science. And don't believe everything you hear. Test it, push on it. But it's okay to take whatever science is saying and relegate it under the leadership, the preeminence of who God is. And however that works out for you, that's fine on these tertiary issues.
Can I offer, this is just something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't know theologically how this hits you guys, but as I've like grown in my faith, I've learned that it seems that God likes to grow things over time. That's an answer for me of like, why didn't Jesus come in Genesis chapter 4? Like man sinned, Jesus showed up and fixed it all.
Yeah. It would have been easier.
Right. And it seems that the only reason is
short story.
God wanted to use humanity and grow them into something.
Yeah.
Same question about like, why didn't Jesus come back after 50 years? He ascended, and why is it 2,000 plus years later and we're still waiting?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Because God grows things.
That's really good.
And so that applied for me to the Genesis story almost makes me think it shows God's character if he grew the creation of the world over time. I don't know I don't have a ton of evidence for that, but when I hear that it could have been millions of years that God took to create, it actually is like, that makes sense to me. He grows things. God likes to, he's not in a rush, he's not in a hurry like we might be.
Yeah.
We live in a microwave culture where we're like, done, do it quick. That proves how powerful you are.
Yeah.
God's actually saying, I can do it slow.
And see, that's why I read Genesis literally. And that's why I read it saying, okay, so Genesis 1, where it talks about the first day, I believe that God did that. But I also, I'm open to, in the final analysis, if Jesus comes back 10,000 years from now or whatever, and we're able to grow in our understanding of science and astrophysics and quantums and all of that to such an extent that we can have a more nuanced approach to how these actually do weave together, I think they do. But again, it's more for me, it's sport. It's kind of fun. It's almost like putting together a puzzle. For me, it's not battleground. And I think that could be helpful for some people.
And it sounds like we think about the Bible, at least for me, kind of more raised in a Christian home, and this whole idea of the Bible can't be wrong. Like if this is disproved, and it sounds like what we're saying is it's not about the Bible being wrong, because we believe the Bible is the source of truth, like it is right in what it's trying to say. And that maybe if science or something we learn might actually reveal our interpretation of it's just wrong.
Right.
and that doesn't threaten the whole thing.
Well, I mean, look at archaeologically, they've doubted the Bible in all these different ways over the centuries, and they're all wrong. They've never proved the Bible wrong. So no, I don't think the Bible's wrong.
And it seems like there's back and forth here, where there's, hey, we're not talking about the Bible itself being wrong, but how we interpret it. Hey, that could have been wrong here because of what science taught us. But on the flip side, there could also be, hey, science can be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that science is, I'm just saying as a big umbrella term here, like science could have been wrong. We talked about, Adam, what you said about man being created like special in God's image and his likeness. That does seem to push really hard on the idea that we came from a fish.
Yeah.
Because that just seems to not be able to live side by side. So it's begging that question of, oh, wow. So in this case, hey, science could just be wrong here. And that back and forth.
Something else I'll say too that I've heard, some people will say, well, the Bible says this, but science says this. I think you have to call time out there because I don't think science necessarily says anything. Scientists do. People who are interpreting the data that they've received from the scientific work they've done, and they've decided this is what I believe now based on the evidence that I have.
Yeah.
But science is not saying necessarily anything.
Yeah.
That's helped me to understand, like, okay, wait a minute.
And again, I think the mother-father image really helps. It's like, I heard mom say this, I heard dad say this. If you get them in the same room, you can probably get a more complete story. Like when you guys first met, what was it like? She's going to say something, he's going to say something. And there's going to be very different perspectives. And so when you put them together, be like, oh, I see how it all fits together. That makes sense to me. So for example, I don't believe we came from apes. I don't believe we've evolved from chimpanzees. And at the same time, I can read a book that talks about how the alleles of secondary, tertiary organisms all share the same allele groupings in DNA. It's like, oh, wow. Okay. Well, then it seems like these descended from these creatures. How does that work? I don't know. Let me look into that, but I'm not going to be scared about it. And this is what I really want to emphasize to people is like, don't fear learning more about it. Because as you learn more about it from science, when you feel that pressure again, remember, this is the limits of our knowledge at this time in our context. If you know the Bible is true and Christ is preeminent, then you never have to fear. You never have to worry about where science is going to lead us. Yeah. Because if science were to come out tomorrow and say like God never existed because of this, I'm like, that's baloney. I don't believe that. I'm not going to worry.
Let me throw a monkey wrench in and tell me what you guys think about this.
Monkey wrench.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, wow.
I didn't even know.
That's
That's
crazy.
nicely done.
That's so good.
But is it possible, I've thought about this, is it possible that God could have used evolution to like lead to a place where you had hominids, which we seem to have fossil records, that there's evidence that there's something like that, that were on the earth. God chose two hominids to be Adam and Eve, impart something specific in them, special in them, the image of God, the soul, whatever it might be, and then separate them and put them in the garden to have them live a new kind of life, separate from the rest of creation. The reason I'm bringing that up is I don't think that necessarily denies what's in the book of Genesis. I think that is possible. And I think it might actually track with what shows up later in the Bible, God pulling from a larger group to pick someone special. Did it with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Like he does it with David, the Israelites in general. I've heard that. I don't know if I totally believe that. I haven't really spent much time thinking about it. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, as you're saying this, I feel like I'm at a science fair. You know what I mean? And some people, it's like, I just want to get out of that and go back and watch football. Like, I understand that. But it's like, as I listen to it, I'm like, that's interesting. I can see that. And then I have instantly a bunch of questions that say, well, wait a second. So that means that if I believe evolution brought us to the hominid plateau, where God did something special with them, does that mean I have to agree that things died before then and that there was death in the garden? And does that mean when he finally gives the special thing to the two hominids, that means then now they weren't supposed to die, but then sin out of the picture? So a lot of questions. But again, it's like, it's treating it like a science fair, like, oh, that was interesting. Not treating it like, okay, as you leave here, from now on, you're going to believe this forever. Like, no.
Right.
Yeah. And you just mentioned something about death before the garden. So help pull that into the picture, right?
Yeah.
Like, why is that important?
That's one of the biggest problems I have with evolution. Is that the whole idea of evolution is that, when things are a little bit slower or they're not as advantageous biologically, then they die out. And then the genes of the people that had, longer necks, swifter gaits, whatever, they are passed on to the next. And so it continues to get better and better and better. The problem with that is that the competing aspect of it involves death. And as far as we know, theologically, it says that when God created everything, it was all about life. And again, even in saying that, though, okay, this is going to blow your mind. So did God create gnats to live forever?
I hate gnats.
Think about that for a minute. So if God created gnats to live forever, we'd be filled with gnats because they produce like crazy. Or rabbits. There'd be rabbits everywhere.
Or even like trees. Were Adam and Eve not eating plants and fruits, and were those trees not dying and creating new soil for?
Well, see, you're getting all hippie on me now. Like, sorry, plants gotta die. You know what I mean? Like, let's go.
Push back to what you're saying, John. Yeah. Is it possible that there was a physical death happening prior to the fall of mankind, and then a spiritual death was introduced post fall?
Yeah. See, now this again is all what we can look at in terms of Genesis and not be afraid. But I think we live in such a charged environment and in such a context where it's like, these are fighting words. Yeah. Because if you don't believe what I believe, then you're one of them.
Right? So are what you saying to Adam is, I don't know. Like Adam said, I mean, that was a good question. And I'm genuinely like,
I'm saying to his, I'm saying, I would choose to believe the Bible, that he was just like a dude, like without a lot of hair. I don't even know if hominids have hair.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
I've never seen
some like not paleontologist, some early anthropologist. Is that anthropology? What would it be?
Yeah, it's anthropology probably.
Yeah. Evolutionary anthropology. Someone listening to this would be like, this is
someone knows what they're talking about. Like rolling their eyes.
Completely killing this.
So what other...
So to answer your question, no, so I would choose to, understand the biblical portion of it, but appreciate what he's saying and say, this is the thing. I want to show up at heaven and just be like, Lord, I'll take a shack in the corner. I don't need anything big. I'm just happy to be here. But I also don't want to spend the first year in heaven, if there are years, which they're not, but I don't want to be saying to myself like, oh, I was wrong about that. Oh, I was really strong about that and I was wrong. I want to be very open-handed with anything other than the resurrection and anything other than the atonement and anything other than Christ preeminent. Like I want to be very open to what's going on. And I want to be like, that's crazy. I didn't even think of it that way, which I think that's going to happen a lot.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. I feel like that can be really freeing to figure out, hey, what things can I actually hold with an open hand a little bit more and what things what needs to be core, but then what can I push out to the other circles? And
one thing before we move on from that, one thing that I think we do probably need to believe when it comes to Genesis 1, 2, 3 is that there were humans, there was a first Adam, and that they sinned. Because in the New Testament, when they talk about Jesus, they talk about him as the second Adam. Paul talks about that, which means there had to be a first Adam, right, of some kind. And so who was that first Adam? How did that first Adam come to be? That's stuff you can hold like this, which is so cool.
Yeah.
There's like a variety of belief, but there was an OG Adam who sinned and made the same mistakes that we all make.
And this is one of my big points is that faith and science can work together. There's nothing that takes away from science to add the faith dimension to the fact that there was an original woman. There was an original man that had offspring. So if you want to call them hominids, if you want to, whatever, those two can work together and not impede on each other and actually like help each other. Be like, okay, because there had to be a certain part or a certain point in time where these two things got together and had more. And there's eventually us.
I like how you brought that up. Is there anything else in Genesis that, or at least in that creation account, that you would say, this is real important? Like this kind of has to be, like, you kind of made a pretty big statement, like, we're kind of picking apart some of this stuff, right? We're trying to create room for science, but it sounds like, Adam, what you said is this probably can't be picked apart. Like this core truth about it. Are there any more of those that we really need to be aware of as we look into Genesis?
Yeah, I would say, the fact that I don't even know if it's important that there was nothing, but that God is over all of it, and that he brought order out of disorder. I think that's a huge part of it. And then what you were saying, Adam, is that it leads to where we eventually sin and the need for redemption, atonement.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So are there any other questions that you mentioned, John, that you've been asked questions around this stuff a lot? Are there other questions about science and faith kind of butting heads that we haven't hit on yet? Like questions, I think about the flood. You got stuff like that where science looks at the Grand Canyon, right? And it's like, does this kind of prove, does this mean it has to be old? Or like could young Earth could make sense with the Grand Canyon? Like, are any of those other topics helpful for us to.
Yeah, I think they're fun exploring. Like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you explore? I remember there was this theory a long time ago, and I don't know if it's been debunked and you might be familiar with this, but that when the earth was first formed, it was like, baseball, and there was a lot of water that was trapped under the crust of the earth. Do you remember this?
I've heard this, yeah.
Yeah, and it formed like a bubble. It's almost like wobbled, and that's why we have 23-degree tilt. And that bubble came to the surface and went up into the atmosphere and went over Pangea and dumped water on everything. And that's where the flood came from, which explains our wobble. It explains our tilt. It explains the Mid-Atlantic ridge. There's this giant gash in the Earth's crust. I don't know. Have you heard? I'm sure that science has been like, no, we can't believe that.
I've definitely heard that. The other thing I've heard is because it's determined or called a worldwide flood, people are like, well, that's impossible. The whole globe couldn't have flooded. What I know from the Bible is hyperbole is the type of language that's used at times with things like this. For example, in Joshua, it talks about like the Israelites wiped out every man, woman, and child. They destroyed the whole city. And then like the next chapter, there's women from that city and they're intermarrying with them. It's like, well, that's hyperbole. Like they didn't actually we'd use that type of terminology in sports, like we destroyed that team.
Yeah.
We didn't actually kill and wipe out another team, but we beat them pretty badly.
He went yard.
Yeah, exactly.
He shot that thing a mile. Like, well, was it 5,280 feet?
So it's possible when they say,
wait. The Eagles destroyed the Chiefs.
There it is.
Destroyed, like wiped them off the surface of the map.
Yes,
didn't really do that.
So it's possible that the worldwide flood means the world that they knew at that time. Like within reason, these are the communities around us. All of that area flooded, and Noah built the ark in that area. That's I think a reasonable interpretation of the story of Noah.
Yeah,
and that I think creates space for people who might find it unbelievable to think of a flood that covered the entire globe. But I do believe God is sovereign, and He could have created a flood that covered the entire globe.
Yeah, and so this isn't going to be helpful for some people because like they don't want ranges. They don't want spectrums. Like, well, there's a spectrum of the ways you can look at it. They want specifics. And so the specifics over the spectrum is where battle lines are drawn.
Right.
That's where we come, I don't like you, you don't like me. This is what I believe, this is what you believe. And I think what we're advocating for is the spectrum approach to things, is to be able to say like, yeah, Adam, you're right. But the word there in Hebrew is haaretz, which means, it can also mean the land. But it can also mean the earth, like they didn't have an idea of the globe, However, when you look at like the Inca, the Inti, when you look in the Yoruba, when you go over to even Southeast Asia, when you go
Gilgamesh,
the
epics,
yeah. Don't give me any story on that. It's one of my favorite stories of all time. But what's fascinating in the Gilgamesh story, and what I'm saying is that every culture has a flood story.
Yeah.
Every culture has where somebody saved humanity through the flood. And so in Gilgamesh, you have Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim is this guy who built an ark. The gods told him to build an ark, and they put everybody on the ark, and he saved, and that's how he became immortal. And so you got Gilgamesh going up to Utnapishtim and saying, like, how can I be immortal? And, I don't know, I think what's important in saying that is that the dynamic range of, on the one hand, you can't deny that something happened. A flood happened at some point, and we see evidence of it. There's science for it, and it's fascinating. There are some scientists that argue, and they're like, well, you can't just explain the Grand Canyon by the flood, and you can't talk about instant petrification of wood into stone, and so like you're invalidating all the layers and strata of rocks. So the Cenozoic era never happened. It's like, well, there's a spectrum, and it's okay to have Christ as Lord, to love Jesus, to love people, and to be about the mission of reaching people for Christ while we peruse the spectrum of like, that's interesting.
Yeah, I like how you brought it into what is most important, which is going to be my question. Because if you look at creation, and is it the most important thing that I know if it's 6 literal days or not? Is it the most important thing with the flood? Was it the whole earth? And if it wasn't, does that wreck something? Like, am I at risk? Is someone's faith at risk if they were to actually say, oh wow, so maybe it wasn't a whole earth flood? What should we be taking out of this? What is Genesis really wanting us to walk away with? Is it whether or not it was literal, or is it something else?
One thing I love about the Old Testament is it's a consistent picture of who Jesus is. We see that in the story of Adam and Eve. I think we see that in the story of Noah as well. Noah is one man with his family saving mankind, but because of his righteous acts. And I think continuously in the Old Testament, you see that like a righteous man like David and Abraham, and it's all like a picture pointing forward to one man who actually would save humanity for all time, and that would be Jesus. So I think as we think about like thinking back to the omelet thing, like that's the omelet.
That's your
like,
favorite analogy.
I love that analogy.
It just made me hungry.
Mine was better, but
that is what God is doing in this story. Is He's like presenting a picture of this is who Jesus will be, and the promise that's to come.
So repeat your question again, because I was going to answer it in a totally different way.
Yep. So I just want to know, how should we be looking at Genesis? And because I feel like I sense this desire that the most important thing from Genesis is whether or not this was literal. But it sounds like that's not necessarily the most important thing. Genesis is maybe trying to get us to pay attention to something else.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to annoy people. I'm going to get all kinds of email like, how can you? But I do think it's a range. And I do think it's important to realize that every culture has a flood story, right? So I don't think it could be local. And yet, someone once said this to me, they're like, so you're telling me that kangaroos jumped from Australia over to India, all the way over to where Noah was, just to get on the boat? I'm like, well, maybe.
They haven't heard about the kangaroo rafts?
I don't know. And maybe they've adapted since then. You know, that's kangaroos used to be deer, or I don't know, whatever.
Or if there was Pangea at that time, everything was already land connected.
Yeah, Pangea is an answer for everything.
So we're hitting, again, so much good information, so much learning about, hey, how really should we be looking at Genesis? And we're trying to free ourselves from the need for Genesis to be some scientific textbook. And it's actually teaching us just about who God is, his character, and it's not always threatening science. And so there's a divorce, mom and dad, and we've maybe felt like we've gone back and forth between the two, and each one's telling us something, but in reality, you want to say something different.
Well, the problem is, and I appreciate the way you're saying it, and I think you're right. I'm not saying anything you're saying is wrong, but the thing is, I would say it more pronouncedly. It's not so much mom and dad are divorced and we don't know what to think. It's more that we are divorced children. And not that, there's some kind of irreparable harm. That there's obviously a lot of people out there that come from divorced families. But it's different when you come from a divorced family. I'm not saying that you will never be able to overcome it, but there's a significant event that happened and it changes who you are. And so moving on from the actual analogy is to say, in our culture right now, between science and faith, we've got to realize that our perspective is forever tainted by the split. And so as we are trying to figure out, well, what does the Bible say? Could you imagine, if over the last 500 years, if our scientists could have married it with, in a good way, with faith, I think we'd have a much different appreciation for how we started. And I think we wouldn't have this war going on. But because we got this war going on, we've got two very different data sets that are incomplete because they don't talk to each other. Yeah, right. But if they had actually talked to each other over 500 years, I mean, I'm talking about like 5 years, I'm talking 500 years where people, I'm not saying that every scientist needed to be a Christian or anything like that, or every Christian needed to be perfectly scientific or whatever. But imagine if there was agreement there that people could work together. All the thinkers that have come since then, all the Einsteins that were Christian that have abandoned science because they thought it was dangerous. All of the scientists that have abandoned the faith because they thought it was ridiculous. Man, all those people we've lost that we could be living in the legacy of that right now. And so that's all I'm saying is that, you're going to have a lot of questions and you're going to have a range of things that you appreciate, and that's okay for the context that we're in. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. And we're titling this as Science Disproved the Creation Story.
Yeah,
so we're saying,
that's what I mean.
We're saying that is just the premise is off. Is we're saying that they're not.
It's hard because it's supposed to be evidence. Look, so you're going to walk away from this podcast. I've got answers, so now I can go to battle. No, it's more of a introspective. This is who we are as a result of the conflagration that has happened between mom and dad.
Yeah, and probably it should give us confidence to engage. If you're a person of faith, you can engage in a scientific conversation and it will have actually no negative effects on your faith, and vice versa, science into faith, because these two things can go together. You started off by sharing scientists from history who were Christians, like Descartes, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and that tradition has continued on.
Yep.
And it can continue even today.
And so, it's like, can we get them talking again? I don't think there's anything that science suffers from by saying the split second before the Big Bang, we feel like God set up a directive for all these things to flow out. Science doesn't suffer if we say that. In the same way, if you flip it around to say that science tells us how he did it, there's nothing that faith suffers in that.
Right.
And so it's like, can we, man, it'd be awesome over the next several decades if we could get science and faith kind of working together again, get mom and dad back together again, just talking again. I think we could have a whole different 100 years from now, 200 years from now, we could have a whole different set of assumptions about it. And I totally think in the same way we would look back on Copernicus or Galileo, we'd be like, oh, well, you got some weird thoughts on this. That's the way they're looking at our conversation and be like, man, you guys are so stilted. Why were you at war with each other?
Yeah, that's helpful. And it seems like in its purest form, the Bible and science are both God's creation. It's God uses both in its purest form. And then where that divorce, where things come is us kind of like messing with it and bringing in our interpretations, our own baggage, our own presuppositions. But it sounds like in the purest form, like these actually complement each other. Yeah. And they do different things.
Yeah. And again, it's like looking at the painting. And if someone were to walk up to him and be like, oh, let's look at the chemical composition of this color. And that Christian would be like, no, you can't do that. Why? Like, why wouldn't you be able to do that? And then conversely, if you're to be like, let's step back and appreciate this. No, there's nothing to appreciate. It doesn't exist. Like, what are you talking about? It's right there. So
it's good. So good. So maybe just, if you can, summarize a real quick bite-sized thing for people who are walking away from this saying, okay, so has science disproved the creation story? And just give me a real quick response to that. Summarize what you've been saying.
I would say no, and it can't. Because they're doing two different things. Science is concerned with the world that we live in, how it works and what it is. And what the Bible is concerned with is actually who and why. Yeah. So those are totally different things and they work together. So no, it hasn't disproved it.
That's so good.
Now I would say no because of omelets.
Yeah.
We love
balls in the middle of the floor.
Omelets, Bill Nye, all those people.
Yeah, you can't diagnose again the theory of music and not appreciate music. Like, so how would it disprove the fact that a song, a melody is being played by analyzing all the component notes to it, or just the idea of like I'm way out of my depth on this one, but it's like one of those things where you click on YouTube videos where you're just like, I want to figure out what is this theory of harmony, like when things go like, and you see like, I don't even know what I'm talking about, but things vibrate and they have certain channels and frequencies. And when those frequencies overlap and the sine waves are in sevenths and fifths and thirds, like that stuff just blows me. I can, like a rainy Saturday afternoon, I can be like, wow, and just look at that and appreciate that. And in appreciating that and understanding that, I'm not going to walk away and be like, man, he just disproved music.
Right.
That's so ridiculous. And again, you do it law and justice. You can do it with any. I wish politicians did it with economics. That's one where they don't really jibe well together. But the whole idea here of being able to examine scientifically how God did it is somehow going to disprove the fact that there's a God. That seems ridiculous to me.
So I know one part of our church here is that there's a lot of good information here, and there's a lot of evidence for why we believe what we believe. But that evidence is never meant to be like a bat you smack over someone's head, and it's all about people.
It's fun.
All about
sometimes it's fun.
Sometimes it is fun, depending on who it is. You got that knucklehead sister. You just
what are you talking about?
Come on, get it right. Yeah. But the reality is, it's about relationships and conversations. And I mean, what we just did here is an example of that. Is we just sat here and talking about it. It opens up so many different ways of looking at it. And so, whoever it is that you're talking to about this, I would say, have grace with this. Have patience and have openness. And openness doesn't mean that you're sacrificing the core of what you believe, of who Jesus is, about whether the Bible can be true or trusted, any of that. But you can open your hands and say, hey, maybe science and faith and the Bible are not quite as at odds as we thought it was. And that we can actually enjoy the process of learning about it and getting into it and not being threatened, but just sitting in that without having it threaten our faith. Which actually brings us right to our next episode that's coming up, is things that we're saying is coming from the Bible. It's coming from Genesis. And so we're kind of making a lot of assumptions, aren't we? Like, how do we know the Bible can even be trusted? So if we're saying the Bible is speaking to the reason we are here and how God made things, I mean, we have to answer that question of, can the Bible actually be trusted? Is it reliable? Is it true? And that's something we're getting into in our next episode. So do not miss it. Come back and join us as we dive into the Bible.
The Bible's been manipulated over the years because it's thousands of years old. I don't know how to refute that personally.
Put this in perspective for us, 25,000 copies of this. Is there anything else historically that comes close to that amount? Are there other things that have that many copies?
No.
But what evidence do we have? Like, what have we found? Are there contradictions?
I've seen lots of TikToks claiming that there are.
Between 1100 AD and 150 BC, over 1,000 years' time, nothing had changed.
I've never heard any of this before. This is
It's
fascinating.
fascinating stuff.